Hello, and I believe this is a story meant to be listened slowly, like a secret shared late at night. If the storytelling likes uh, likes to your personal interest, or feel free to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. And this is a safe space for stories. Now listen closely.
Sleep here, I'll be fine.
Ivy Whitmore desperately needed sleep, because restoring the 300-year-old fresco had been more exhausting than she'd imagined, and she still had exactly 20 minutes until her stop. What she didn't have in mind, that by closing her eyes for just a second and tilting her head to the side, she'd be falling asleep on Jasper Hale's shoulder, the most dangerous man in town, and that this simple, innocent, accidental gesture would be seen as an invitation that the mob boss accepted with a slow smile. But his fiancée found it unforgivable. Ivy just wanted to sleep, but she woke up with two new problems, and one of them was ridiculously attractive and would change her life forever. First of all, hello, I'm Lena, the creator of this channel and all these stories, and now on the screen, you're seeing comments from Luna and Ginger. Thank you so much to everyone who commented, and tell me something. What's more important, a billion-dollar empire or true love? Answer down below and maybe your comment will appear in the next video. Chapter 1. Wrong Shoulder and Accidental War.
I didn't move.
Restoring the 300-year-old fresco had been more exhausting than I'd imagined, and I still had exactly 20 minutes until my stop. The subway car was surprisingly empty for a Thursday night, and I barely glanced at the man in a suit next to the empty seat before throwing myself onto the bench. Sleep wanted to embrace me, but I couldn't embrace sleep. I took off my flats for just a second to give my feet a rest. The relief was instant. My phone buzzed with a message from Theo. "Sis, worked late again? Get some rest." I typed back, "Just one more month and the fresco is done. Then I'll rest. Promise." I put my phone away and leaned my head against the seat. I closed my eyes. Just for a second, I thought. Just to rest my eyes that had spent hours focused on the tiniest details of 14th century pigments. I don't know exactly when it happened. The vibration of the subway must have lulled me because suddenly I was falling into a deep sleep. My head tilted to the side and landed on something solid, warm, that smelled like something expensive and masculine. I was sleeping on a stranger's shoulder, but I didn't know that. I was fast asleep, breathing softly, finally resting. What I couldn't know was that the man next to me had just felt the weight of my head against his shoulder, that he had looked down and seen a completely unknown woman sleeping as if she'd known him for years, that something in him had frozen, torn between the instinct to wake me and a strange curiosity. Jasper Hale wasn't a man who let people touch him, but there was something about me, in that unconscious and vulnerable moment, that made him stay completely still. He didn't wake me, he just let me sleep, watching my relaxed face with an intensity I would never know until much later. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The subway jolted hard and I woke up suddenly, disoriented, and then I realized the soft fabric under my cheek, the masculine scent, the warmth of another body too close. I jumped away so fast I almost hit my head on the handrail. My heart raced. My face was on fire. "Oh my God!" The words came out in an uncontrollable stream. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I was so tired. And I didn't realize, and that's when I finally looked at him. Really looked. The air left my lungs. The man wasn't just handsome. He wore an impeccable gray suit, but that wasn't what made me forget how to breathe. It was the eyes. Green. So intensely green they seemed to glow under the artificial light. And they were fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin tingle. The corner of his mouth lifted. It wasn't quite a smile, but almost. "It's okay," he said, and the deep voice made my stomach knot strangely. "No." I shook my head hard. "It's not okay. I slept on your shoulder. You're a stranger. This is way too embarrassing." "You seemed like you needed it." His calmness was unsettling. "Worked late." "Yes." I still felt the heat in my face. "I restore art. Old frescoes. It's detailed. Exhausting. Art restorer." He repeated the words as if tasting them. Interesting. There was something about the way he looked at me that made the air feel heavier, charged, like there was electricity about to crackle. I'd never felt this acute awareness of another person. I saw my station approaching. "This is my stop!" I got up so fast I almost tripped, grabbing my bag. I should have left, but something made me stop at the door and turn. "What's your name?" The words came out before I could think. "So I know who I embarrassed." Those green eyes studied me. Jasper. And you. Ivy. I could barely say the name. Good night, Jasper, and sorry again. I ran out. The doors closed behind me. I stood there breathing hard, watching the train disappear, my heart still racing, my hands trembling. I had no idea who Jasper was, didn't know about the danger I'd touched. All I knew was that I couldn't stop thinking about his eyes. While I disappeared into the darkness of the platform, inside the car continuing its journey, Jasper sat alone in his seat, or almost alone. Boss, the voice came from behind him. You let a stranger sleep on you. Jasper touched the shoulder where I had slept, as if he could still feel the weight of my head. I know, Owen. The man sitting in the back seat leaned forward. Owen had been with Jasper his entire life, since childhood, and knew each of his habits. And this definitely wasn't one of them. You never do this. You're paranoid about touch. Anyone who gets close without permission, you push away. I know. Jasper kept looking at the door I'd left through, but she was different. It wasn't a question. Owen had seen everything. The way the boss had frozen when my head landed on his shoulder. The way he hadn't pushed me away. The way he'd stayed completely still, almost protective, letting me sleep. Different how? Owen insisted. Jasper didn't answer because he didn't know how to explain. How to explain that an unknown woman, with a wrinkled floral dress and paint stains on her hands, had done something no one could do. How to explain that for those few minutes, while I slept unconscious on his shoulder, he had felt something he hadn't felt in years? Peace. The apartment I shared with Theo was on the 4th floor of an old building. I climbed the stairs, dragging my feet. The door opened before I put the key in the lock. You're late. Theo had his arms crossed. I was worried. Sorry. I fell asleep on the subway. He blinked. You slept where? Shit. On some guy's shoulder. You slept on a stranger? His voice went up 3 octaves. Ivy, are you crazy? It was an accident. I was exhausted, and he was kind. He let me sleep. Theo ran his hand through his hair, frustrated. Ivy, you can't do that. It's dangerous. You don't know who people are. I know, but he seemed safe, trustworthy. You don't know him. I know his name. Jasper. Theo froze, completely still. Jasper what? His voice was strange, tense. I frowned. Didn't ask his last name. Why? For a long moment, he just looked at me. There was worry mixed with fear in his eyes, but then he shook his head. Nothing. Just don't do it again, okay? I won't. Promise. Later, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and thought about green eyes, about a deep voice, about a name, Jasper. I was never going to see him again. It was a huge city. The chances were 0. So why did a part of me hope I was wrong? The Hale mansion was on the rich side of town, surrounded by high walls and heavy security. Jasper entered through the front door at 11 at night, tired from a full day of meetings and negotiations that never seemed to end. Susie was waiting in the living room, as always. You're late, she said without looking up from the wedding magazine she was flipping through. Jasper loosened his tie. The meeting ran long. The wedding is in 2 months. We need to finalize the details. Susie finally looked at him, and there was nothing but practical irritation in her gaze. No love, no longing, just the impatience of someone who had an agenda to keep. You decide. I'll sign wherever I need to. Her eyes narrowed. You don't care about any of this wedding. It's a business marriage, Susie. You know that. Jasper went straight to the bar, pouring himself a glass of whiskey. But it's still our wedding. A little effort would be nice. He took a sip before answering. I show up, say the vows, sign the papers. Isn't that enough? You're impossible. Susie stood up so forcefully the magazine fell to the floor. She left the room, slamming the door violently. Jasper stood alone in the silence of the mansion, looking at the glass in his hand. He touched the shoulder of his suit again, that unconscious gesture he'd been repeating since he left the subway. He thought about Ivy, about the floral dress, about the paint stains, about the way she'd turned red and apologized 1,000 times, about the softness, the innocence, the natural femininity that was the absolute opposite of everything he knew, opposite of Susie. The office door opened. Owen entered without knocking, as he always did. Boss, tomorrow's meeting with the battalias has been confirmed for... Owen. Jasper interrupted him. Have you ever met someone who made you question everything? Owen stopped in the middle of the room. What do you mean? Someone so different from your world that they made you want to leave it? The capo processed the question for a long moment. Boss, are you talking about the girl from the subway? Maybe. You talked to her for 2 minutes, and in those 2 minutes, I felt more peace than I have in years. Jasper took another sip, letting the whiskey burn his throat. That's dangerous, boss. You're engaged. Arranged marriage. The families depend on this alliance. If you... I know. Jasper cut him off. He was silent for a moment. But for the first time in decades, I want something that's not about power or control. I want normalcy. And you think you'll find that with some random art restorer? Maybe. Jasper turned to his friend, and there was a determination in those green eyes that Owen knew well. It was the same determination that had made him boss at 28. Find her, boss. Find her, Owen. It wasn't a request. It was an order. I just want to know if she's real, or if it was the illusion of a tired moment. Owen sighed, recognizing defeat. feet. When Jasper decided something, there was no argument that would make him change his mind. Okay, I'll find her. Thank you. After Owen left, Jasper stood alone in the office. He touched his shoulder one more time. He could still feel the soft weight of her head, the scent of lavender mixed with paint, the calm breathing of someone who trusted enough to sleep. Ivy Whitmore. He didn't know her last name yet, didn't know where she lived or worked, but he was going to find out, because for the first time in 34 years of life, Jasper Hale had felt something other than emptiness, and he wasn't ready to let that go, even if it meant destroying everything he'd built. Would this powerful man risk it all just for love? Or is love the only thing that matters to our protagonist? Chapter 2. Reunion and Attraction.
I couldn't forget you.
3 days had passed since that night on the subway. 3 days in which I tried to convince myself I'd forgotten the green eyes and the deep voice. 3 days in which I failed miserably. I was at the museum, in my favorite place in the world, completely focused on the fresco that was consuming my life. The aluminum ladder swayed slightly every time I moved, but I was used to it by now. The tiny brush in my hand worked on details so small they needed a magnifying glass to be seen properly. It was meticulous work, almost meditative, that normally left me in a state of absolute peace. But today, peace wouldn't come, because every time I blinked, I saw green eyes watching me. Every time the silence of the museum stretched out, I heard a deep voice saying my name like it was something precious. I was pathetic. Completely, absolutely pathetic. A grown woman fantasizing about a stranger who had probably already forgotten me. Excuse me. The male voice came from below, making me jump so hard I almost knocked over the pigment jar. I turned my head too fast, my heart already racing before I'd even processed who was there. But it wasn't him. It was another man, older, with a military posture, and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of the environment. He wore a simple suit, nothing like the impeccable suit Jasper wore, but there was something about the way he moved that made me slightly uncomfortable. The museum is open to the public, I said politely, returning to my work. Feel free to explore. The man didn't respond, just stood there for a few more minutes before leaving silently. I didn't even think about it again. The Hartley Museum was small, specialized in medieval art, and we got all kinds of curious visitors. What I didn't know was that this man was Owen, and that he had just found everything he needed. That same night, somewhere in the city I didn't know, Owen entered Jasper's private office with a thin folder in his hands. Found her, Owen said without preamble, tossing the folder onto the mahogany desk. Ivy Whitmore, 26 years old, restorer at the Hartley Museum. Simple life, lives with her brother Theo Whitmore, who's a graphic designer. No criminal record, totally clean, boss. Jasper picked up the folder, opening it slowly. There was a photo of me, taken from a distance while I was working. I was focused, with my hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing that beige lab coat full of stains that I loved. He studied the image for a long moment. What's the address? His voice was controlled, but Owen knew the boss well enough to sense the urgency beneath the calm. Boss, what are you going to do? See her again, Owen sighed, crossing his arms. And Susie? Susie doesn't care about me, just about the wedding. Jasper closed the folder, but kept holding it like it was something valuable. But you care about Ivy? The pause was long and heavy. I need to find out. The next day, I was in the same position, on the same ladder, working on the same fresco when I heard footsteps approaching. The museum was practically empty, as it always was on Thursday afternoons, so any sound echoed off the old walls. Impressive. I froze. That voice. Deep, controlled, impossible to forget. I turned so fast the ladder swayed dangerously. Jasper, the name came out in a higher pitch than I'd intended. From the subway? He was there, standing a few meters away but completely different, without the impeccable suit. Today he wore dark jeans and a gray long-sleeved shirt that hugged his body in a way that should be illegal. His hair was slightly messy, like he'd run his hand through it several times. He seemed to be trying to look normal, casual, but there was something about him that made that impossible. Something in his posture, in the way he occupied space, in the intensity of those green eyes. That's me. One corner of his mouth lifted, surprised. Very. I came down the ladder so fast I almost tripped over my own feet. I felt heat rising to my face. What are you doing here? Came to see art. He took a step closer, and the air between us grew heavier. And maybe, see you. My heart raced. I literally felt it beating so hard I was sure Jasper could hear it. See me? Why? Because I haven't stopped thinking about that night, on the subway, about you sleeping on my shoulder. If I was red before, now I must have been the color of a ripe tomato. That still embarrasses me. It shouldn't. He was closer now, close enough for me to smell him. Something woody and masculine that made my head spin. It was the best moment of my month. I blinked. confused. Sleeping on your shoulder was the best moment of your month. You must have a really boring life then. And then he laughed. It was a low sound, almost reluctant, like he wasn't used to laughing. But it was genuine and warm and made something strange happen in my chest. Maybe. Or maybe you're more special than you think. I'm just an ordinary restorer with an ordinary life. I tried to protest, but the words came out weak. There's nothing ordinary about you, Ivy. And I was speechless, completely mute, looking at this man who appeared out of nowhere and said things that made my entire world tilt on its axis. Jasper broke the silence first. Show me your work? Seriously? I managed to find my voice again. You're interested in restoration? I'm interested in you. Restoration is part of that. My God, how did he do this? How did he say things that completely disarmed me with that calm voice and those eyes that seemed to see right through me? I showed him the fresco because I didn't know what else to do. This one's from the 14th century, Italian. It was damaged by moisture when the museum ceiling leaked 10 years ago. It took 6 months just to stabilize the structure before I could even start restoring the painting itself. Each little piece needs to be treated individually, respecting the original pigments, the artist's technique. I was rambling now, nervous, using art as a shield against his intensity. But when I glanced at Jasper, I realized he wasn't looking at the fresco. He was looking at me. Watching the way I gestured as I spoke, the passion in my voice, the delicacy of my movements, it was such complete attention, so focused, that it made my skin tingle. Are you even listening? I asked, turning to face him. Every word. The green eyes met mine. Keep going. We ended up in the museum's small cafeteria, sitting at a table near the window overlooking the inner garden. I had a lukewarm cappuccino in front of me, more as something to occupy my hands than because I wanted to drink it. So, Jasper, what do you do? Besides being kind to tired strangers on the subway, he took a sip of black coffee, and I noticed the way his fingers held the cup. Firm and controlled. Business. Import. Export. Interesting. Like, what products? Various. He changed the subject so smoothly I almost didn't notice. And you, did you always want to restore art? I let him redirect the conversation. Since I was a kid, I visited museums with my parents and saw restorers working. I thought, I want to do that. And I did. Are your parents still alive? The familiar pain squeezed my chest. No, car accident when I was 20. I only have Theo now, my brother. I'm sorry. And there was a sincerity in his voice that made me believe he really meant it. Thank you. I took a sip of cappuccino to give myself time to recover. And you? Family? Complicated. My father died and I had to take over his business. He paused, and I saw something cross his eyes. Hesitation. And I have a fiancé. The world stopped spinning. Fiancé? The word came out hoarse. He realized his mistake immediately. Yes, but it's an arranged marriage, you know? For the families. Something inside me sank. I pulled back emotionally, building walls as fast as possible. Oh, so you're committed. Technically, yes, but it's not for love. But it's still an engagement. I stood up so fast the chair creaked. I need to get back to work. It was good to see you, Jasper. His hand caught mine before I could pull away. The touch was gentle, soft, but firm. Ivy, wait. You have a fiancé. You shouldn't be here, with me. I tried to pull my hand back, but he didn't let go. I know, but I can't stop thinking about you. Jasper, this isn't right. My voice trembled. I know, but rarely do the right things feel as right as this. I looked at our intertwined fingers, at the way his large hand completely enveloped mine. I fought internally between what I wanted and what was right. I'm not the type of girl who gets involved with committed men, and I respect that. He finally released my hand, but didn't move away. But what I feel for you in 2 meetings is more real than anything I've felt for my fiancé in a year. That doesn't change the fact that you're getting married in 2 months. No, it doesn't. The pause was heavy. But what if I don't? I blinked. What? What if I cancel it? For you. You barely know me. My voice rose, incredulous. And yet you make me want things I've never wanted. Normalcy, peace, life without violence. The word hit me like a slap. Violence? I saw immediate regret in his eyes. Forget it. He stepped back, running his hand through his hair. Sorry for bothering you. I won't come back. And then he left. Simply turned and walked out of the cafeteria, leaving me standing there with my heart racing and my mind spinning. Violence, arranged marriage, import and export business he didn't want to detail. I should be scared, should be running in the opposite direction. But all I felt was confusion, and God forgive me, something dangerously close to falling in love. Chapter 3. Susie finds out.
Then let there be war.
And war begins. The days that followed after Jasper left the museum cafeteria were strange in a way I couldn't explain. I continued my normal routine, waking up early, working on the fresco until my eyes hurt, coming home exhausted. But there was a constant restlessness beneath the surface. Like I was waiting for something I couldn't name. Like a part of me was constantly alert, looking for green eyes on every corner. in every subway car, in every shadow of the museum, but he didn't come back, and I didn't know if I was relieved or disappointed about that. What I couldn't know, what I had no way of guessing while I mixed pigments and restored ancient frescoes, was that on the other side of town, in the world Jasper inhabited, things were falling apart in a dangerous and irreversible way. Jasper was sitting in his private office, looking at papers he should be reading, but the words seemed blurred, meaningless, because the only thing he could see were paint stains on delicate hands and a wrinkled floral dress. It was pathetic, he knew that. A man in his position getting distracted by a woman he barely knew, but the knowledge didn't change anything. The door opened without ceremony, and Owen entered with that tense expression Jasper had learned to recognize over the years. It was the expression that said there were problems, and probably serious ones. "Boss, we need to talk." Owen closed the door behind him with deliberate care, the kind of care you have when you don't want anyone to hear the conversation that's about to happen. Jasper leaned back in the leather chair, folding his fingers over his chest as he watched his childhood friend with renewed attention. About the fact that you're distracted, and in our world, distraction kills. Owen didn't waste time beating around the bush, because that was one of the things Jasper always appreciated about him, the brutal honesty when necessary. "The meeting with the Battaglias yesterday was a disaster. You barely heard their proposal, agreed to terms you'd normally never accept, and Vittorio Battaglia noticed. He asked me if you were losing control. The tension in the air became palpable, thick as smoke. Battaglia doesn't dare challenge me," Jasper said with that cold voice that made grown men back down. "Not alone. No," Owen agreed, but didn't back down because he'd known Jasper since they were kids running through the dirty streets of the city, before the power and the blood. "But if other families think you're weak, if they realize you're different, they unite, boss. And then it doesn't matter how powerful you are. Numbers win in the end." Jasper knew Owen was right, and that's exactly why the truth hurt, in a way he didn't want to admit. "I'm not weak, but you are different." Owen took a step closer, lowering his voice even though they were alone. "And different in our world is dangerous. You leave without explaining where you're going, come back with that distant look. And I know, boss, I know you're thinking about her, about the art restorer." There was no point in denying it, so Jasper didn't try. "What if I am? Then you need to decide what's more important, because there's Susie too, and she's noticed. She's suspicious, asking questions, and it's only a matter of time before she finds out about Ivy." The way Owen said my name, with care and concern, made something tighten in Jasper's chest. As if the universe was orchestrating the worst possible timing, the office door opened again, and this time it was Susie entering without knocking, with that rigid posture and eyes shining with something dangerous that oscillated between anger and humiliation. "Who is she?" The question came out as an accusation, sharp and direct, no beating around the bush or preliminaries. Jasper dismissed Owen with a nod, and the capo left quickly, clearly relieved not to be present for the imminent explosion. When the door closed, Jasper finally looked at the fiancé he'd never chosen, who had been imposed by family alliances and business deals made before they'd even met. "Who?" he asked, even though he knew exactly what she was talking about. "The woman who's distracting you." Susie practically spat the words, taking furious steps toward his desk. "You think I don't notice? You barely look at me. Leave without warning. Come back with that empty look like you're somewhere else entirely. Who is she?" Jasper stood up slowly, and when he was on his feet, all the dominant presence that made him the boss came back with full force. "That's none of your business." Susie's eyes widened, not with fear, but with absolute indignation. "I'm your fiancé. Everything about you is my business. You're my fiancé for convenience," Jasper said with an icy calm that was somehow more frightening than if he were shouting. "Our families benefit from this arrangement. You benefit. But don't come here pretending you care about me when we both know all you want is the ring, the position, the power." Susie recoiled as if she'd been slapped, and for a moment, just a brief moment, Jasper saw something that could be genuine hurt cross her face. But then the anger came back, stronger, hotter, transforming any vulnerability into pure fury. "I care about respect," she screamed, and tears began to form in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of helpless rage. "And you disrespected me by having an affair." "I'm not having an affair," Jasper corrected, and then added with a brutal honesty he knew would blow everything up. Yet, the silence that followed was deafening. Susie stared at him, mouth open, processing what he'd just admitted, and when words finally came back to her, they came in an uncontrollable stream. "Yet? You're going to cheat on me? You're really going to destroy everything for some bitch who—" "Careful," Jasper interrupted, and there was real danger in his voice now, the kind of danger that made armed men think twice. "Choose your next words very carefully, Susie." But she was beyond the point of care, beyond reason, driven by humiliation and wounded pride. "My father is going to hear about this. He's going to know you're planning to break our alliance. And? Jasper shrugged with an indifference that was calculated to provoke. Richard Cross doesn't scare me. He should. Susie was practically screaming now, all the aristocratic control she normally maintained completely shattered. The alliance between Hale and Cross is the only thing keeping peace with the other families. If you break that, there will be war. Real war. Jasper looked at her for a long moment, and when he spoke, it was with an absolute certainty that made Susie's blood run cold. Then, let there be war. Susie left the office like a hurricane, slamming doors and leaving a trail of fury in her wake. And less than 2 hours later, she was sitting in her father's opulent office, pouring out everything with a mixture of indignation and humiliation that made her voice tremble. Richard Cross was a man who had built his empire on foundations of blood and fear, and he listened to his daughter with a carefully neutral expression that revealed nothing of the calculations happening behind his cold eyes. When Susie finally finished, breathless and furious, he was silent for a long moment before speaking. Jasper Hale is going to break the alliance over some random woman? He repeated the words as if testing their weight, looking for weaknesses or opportunities. He admitted it, Susie insisted, her hands trembling as she gripped her expensive purse too tightly. Said we have nothing real, that she's more important. Richard leaned back in his leather chair, fingers interlaced as he processed the information with the sharp mind of a born strategist. This is unacceptable, he finally said, but there was no emotion in his voice, just cold calculation. If Jasper cancels the wedding, other families will see this as weakness, as instability, and instability in our line of business is dangerous. So what do we do? Susie leaned forward, eyes shining with a thirst for revenge that her father recognized, because it was the same look he saw in the mirror. We find out who she is, everything about her. Richard picked up the phone on the desk, dialing numbers Susie didn't recognize. If Jasper wants to break the alliance, we use her as leverage. And if that doesn't work, he paused significantly, then we make sure other families see his weakness, and we strike when he's most vulnerable. What if he doesn't care enough? Susie asked, even though she knew the question was ridiculous, because she'd seen the look on Jasper's face when he talked about the mysterious woman. He cares, Richard said with absolute certainty. Otherwise, he wouldn't risk everything. And when someone cares that much, they have a weakness that can be exploited. Meanwhile, back at the Hale mansion, Owen entered the office with an urgency that made Jasper look up immediately from the documents he was pretending to read. Boss, we have a problem. Owen's voice was tense in a way Jasper rarely heard, and that alone was enough to put all his instincts on maximum alert. What kind of problem? Jasper was already standing up, his whole body tense and ready for action. Richard Cross sent investigators after the girl, after Ivy. Owen didn't soften the blow, because there was no way to do that without it hurting. The fury that crossed Jasper's face was icy and absolute, the kind of fury that had built his reputation as the most dangerous man on the East Coast. He did what? Susie told her father everything, about you being distracted, about the other woman, and now Richard wants information. He wants to use her as leverage against you. Owen took a step closer, lowering his voice even though they were alone. Boss, he won't touch her physically yet, not while she can be useful as negotiation, but the simple fact that he's investigating means she's on his radar, and nothing good comes from that. He doesn't touch her, Jasper said, and each word came out with a promise of violence if anyone dared disobey him. Not him, not anyone from his organization. Jasper, you're the boss, but Richard has 3 families allied with him now. Owen tried to make his friend see reason, see the real danger of the situation. If he declares war, Battaglia, Romero, and Zhao will join him. You'd be alone against 4 families. I've always been alone, Jasper responded with a calm that was somehow more frightening than anger. And I've always won, but this time you have a weakness, Owen insisted, because someone needed to say it. Someone needed to make Jasper understand the gravity. Ivy, they'll use her. They'll hurt her to get to you. The expression on Jasper's face changed, and Owen saw the man he'd known since childhood disappear completely, replaced by the boss the whole world feared, by the monster who had built an empire on the bones of enemies. Then I protect her with everything I have. And if Cross wants war, he'll get it. Not the distracted man Battaglia saw in the meetings. He'll get the boss in full. The man who built this empire from nothing. Owen felt a chill run down his spine, because he knew that look, knew what happened when Jasper decided someone had crossed the line. What are you going to do? First, protect Ivy. Second, remind Richard Cross why the families fear me. Jasper was already grabbing his coat, already moving toward the door with a determination that didn't accept arguments. You're going to her? Now? Owen asked, even though he already knew the answer. Now, Jasper confirmed, and then stopped at the door, turning to look at his friend with an expression that was simultaneously vulnerable and determined. Owen, if something happens to me, you make sure she stays safe. Promise, boss, promise. And Owen, who had sworn loyalty to Jasper over 20 years ago, who had followed him through wars and betrayals and blood, did the only thing he could do. I promise. I was at the apartment with Theo, eating cold pizza straight from the box because neither of us had the energy to cook after a long day at work. The TV was on some reality show neither of us was really watching, and everything seemed normal, safe, completely ordinary. And then the knocks on the door echoed through the apartment, urgent and insistent, in a way that made my heart race before I even knew who was on the other side. "Are you expecting someone?" Theo asked, already standing up with that protective caution of a younger brother who somehow always seemed older and more responsible than me. "No," I answered, and a strange chill ran down my spine as I watched Theo approach the door with careful steps. When he opened it, I saw the figure in the hallway, and my heart simply stopped. Jasper was there, but it wasn't the casual Jasper from the museum or the elegant Jasper from the subway. This was a Jasper who radiated urgency and danger, with green eyes dark with worry and a jaw tense in a way that made him seem truly dangerous. And then I heard Theo whisper, and there was real fear in his voice that made the blood freeze in my veins. "Shit, you're Jasper Hale, the boss." The world seemed to slow down as I processed the words, as I saw the way my brother instinctively backed away, the way Jasper didn't deny the accusation, just stood there with that dominant presence that suddenly made complete sense. "And you're Theo," Jasper said, and his voice was controlled, but there was an urgency underneath that I could feel even from where I was sitting. "Her brother." Then the green eyes found mine across the room. "Can we talk?" "Private?" I should have said no, should have closed the door in his face and pretended I'd never met a green-eyed man on the subway, but there was something about the way he looked at me, something that seemed like genuine fear mixed with determination, that made me stand up from the couch with trembling legs. "Okay," I said, my own voice sounding strange in my ears. My room seemed smaller with Jasper in it, as if his presence consumed all the available space and left little to breathe. I closed the door behind us and turned to face him, crossing my arms over my chest in a pathetic attempt to create some barrier between us. "What did you mean by danger?" The words came out firmer than I expected. Considering my heart was beating so hard I was sure he could hear it. Jasper ran his hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration and exhaustion I'd never seen in him before. And when he spoke, it was with a brutal honesty that made me want to back away. "Do you know who I am?" "Really?" Theo told me, I admitted, remembering the difficult conversation we had after the museum visit, when my brother had finally explained who Jasper Hale was and why I should be terrified. "After you went to the museum, that you're a mob boss, and that scared you?" The question was simple, but there was something vulnerable underneath it, as if the answer mattered more than he wanted to admit. "A lot," I confessed, because there was no point in lying now, but I tried not to think about it because you seemed human, kind, like there was a real person underneath all the violence and power. Something crossed his face, something that could be pain or maybe gratitude, I couldn't tell. "I am human, but I'm also dangerous, and my world is death and violence and blood." He took a step closer, and I instinctively took a step back until my back hit the wall. "My fiancée found out about you, told her father, and now the Cross family is investigating you, looking for information they can use against me." Panic hit me like a cold wave. "Why? I didn't do anything. I just slept on your shoulder on the subway because I care about you," Jasper said, and the simplicity of the statement hit me harder than any elaborate declaration could. And in my world, people I care about become targets, become ways to control me, to hurt me, to weaken me. Tears began to burn in my eyes, because this was all too much, all too fast, and I hadn't asked to be in the middle of mafia wars and broken alliances. I didn't ask for this, I know. He was in front of me now, so close I could feel his warmth, see the small scars on his face that told stories of violence I didn't want to imagine. His hands came up to hold my face with a gentleness that contrasted completely with everything I knew about him. "And I'm sorry, more than you can imagine, but I need to protect you now." "How?" The question came out desperate, wet with tears I couldn't hold back anymore. "Security. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You don't leave without an escort. You don't go anywhere without me knowing you're safe." His hand still held my face, thumbs wiping away the tears that fell without permission. "I don't want to live like that," I protested, my voice breaking at the end because the idea of living like a prisoner, even for my own safety, was terrifying. "And I don't want to see you dead." His voice rose for the first time, desperate and rough, before softening again. "Sorry, I shouldn't yell, but Ivy, you need to understand. These people don't play around. If they decide you're more useful dead, you'll die. And I can't. I won't let that happen. I cried harder, the weight of everything crashing down on me at once. Jasper, I don't know what to do. You let me protect you until I fix this. His hands moved down to my shoulders, firm but gentle, until I guarantee you'll never be in danger because of me again. Fix how? I managed to ask between sobs. By talking to Cross, guaranteeing your safety through deals or... He paused, and I saw the decision form in his green eyes. Or I leave. The shock hit me so hard I stopped crying for a moment. Leave where? The mob. The whole world. Everything. Each word came out with a certainty that seemed impossible. You can do that? My voice was just a whisper now. Incredulous. No. Bosses don't leave. Bosses die in office. That's how things work in my world. He admitted the brutal truth without looking away. But for you, I'll try. For you, I'll risk everything. Because when you slept on my shoulder that night, for the first time in 30 years, I felt peace. And I want to feel that every day for the rest of my life. With you. More tears fell. But now they were from a different emotion. Something between fear and hope. And a love that was growing despite all the reasons not to grow. This is crazy. Completely, he agreed. And for the first time since he arrived, a small smile touched his lips. But it's the decision I've made. You're worth more than any empire, any power, anything I've built, and I'm going to prove it. And then, because there weren't enough words, because everything was too big and scary and impossible, I just leaned forward and kissed him. It was different from previous kisses, desperate and wet with tears and loaded with promises we didn't know if we could keep. When we pulled apart, Jasper rested his forehead against mine, eyes closed as if memorizing the moment. We'll get through this, Ivy, together, I promise. And as crazy as it was, as impossible as it seemed, I believed him. Chapter 4. Security and Closeness.
I canceled the wedding.
What? Why? How could you do this?
The following days were the strangest of my life, and considering I'd just found out I was in love with a mob boss who was willing to abandon an entire empire for me, that said a lot about how surreal everything had become. Security started the next day. I woke up, got ready to go to the museum like I always did, and when I opened the apartment door, there were 2 huge men waiting in the hallway. They didn't introduce themselves with names, just nodded politely and said they were there to escort me, and then spent the entire day following me like silent but impossible to ignore shadows. At first, it was suffocating in a way that made me want to scream. I couldn't go to the corner cafe without one of them following 3 steps behind. Couldn't work on the fresco without feeling eyes watching me from across the museum. Couldn't simply exist without the constant reminder that my life had changed irreversibly. But as the days passed, I started to get used to their presence, the same way someone gets used to the constant noise of a big city, until eventually, it just becomes part of life's background noise. Theo also had security, though he complained louder and more frequently than I did. "This is ridiculous," he said one night while we ate dinner in the apartment, knowing the guards were outside the door, hearing every word. "We're prisoners in our own life. We're safe," I corrected, though I wasn't sure if I completely believed it, or if I was just trying to convince myself. Jasper started showing up more after that night in my room, now without hiding, without pretending these were casual encounters or coincidences. He came to the museum during my lunch breaks, showed up at the apartment for dinners that Theo attended, with a barely disguised expression of disapproval, took me on short walks in public parks where the guards followed us at a respectful but constant distance. And somewhere in the middle of all that, between conversations about art and childhood stories and whispered confessions about fears neither of us usually shared, I fell completely in love. It wasn't the kind of sudden, overwhelming passion that happens in movies. It was something slower and inevitable, like the tide gradually rising until it completely covers the beach. It was during one of those walks, 5 days after security had started, that Jasper stopped under an old tree in the park and turned to face me with a seriousness that made my heart race. "I canceled the wedding," he said without preamble, without warning, just throwing out the information as if it were something simple and not completely revolutionary. I froze in the middle of the stone path, my brain taking a few seconds to process the words. "What?" "This morning, called Susie, her father, everyone involved, and said the wedding wasn't happening, that the alliance was broken." He spoke with a calm that completely contrasted with the magnitude of what he was saying. "But you said that would mean war." My voice rose, panicking for him, for what this meant. "You said the other families would attack, and they will." He shrugged, as if he were talking about the weather. "But I'm not going to marry a woman I hate when I'm in love with you." The world stopped, literally stopped spinning. The air stopped moving. Everything froze except the sound of my heart beating so loud I was sure he could hear it. "You love me? Since the subway? Since you slept on my shoulder and gave me peace for the first time in decades?" He took a step closer, his hands coming up to hold my face in the way that was becoming familiar. "I love you, Ivy Whitmore, and I'll do everything to protect you and have a normal life with you." The tears came without permission, hot and fast, wetting my cheeks as I tried to find words that made sense. What if it doesn't work? What if they kill you for this? Then at least I tried. At least I really lived for a while, instead of just existing in that empty world. His thumbs wiped away the tears with a gentleness that contrasted with everything I knew about who he was in his world. But if I stayed, I'd die anyway. It would just be slower, emptier, until there was nothing left but a shell. I couldn't hold back anymore. I leaned forward and kissed him with all the fear and love and desperation I was feeling, and when we pulled apart, I whispered against his lips, "I love you too, and I'm terrified." "Me too," he admitted, and there was relief in his voice, as if my love was the only thing he needed to hear to make it all worthwhile. "But we'll win, together." While Jasper and I walked hand in hand through the park, completely oblivious to everything except each other, on the other side of town, in a meeting room hidden in an abandoned warehouse that smelled of mold and danger, Richard Cross was officially declaring war. The table was long and dark wood stained by years of use, and around it sat the representatives of the most powerful families on the East Coast. Vittorio Battaglia was to Richard's right, a large man with scars that told stories of violence, his dark eyes assessing everything with a predator's patience. Carlos Romero was to the left, younger, but no less dangerous, with nicotine-stained fingers and a smile that never reached his eyes. And at the opposite end of the table sat Zhang Zhao, the oldest of all, with graying hair and an expression that revealed nothing. "Jasper Hale broke the sacred alliance," Richard began, his voice echoing through the empty room. "For a woman, he showed weakness, showed he can be controlled by emotions, and will never have a better chance to take his territory." Battaglia leaned back in his chair, fingers interlaced over his belly as he considered the words. "Hale is the boss. He built this empire alone, eliminating everyone who got in his way. We can't underestimate that just because he fell in love. But that's exactly why he's vulnerable now," Richard insisted, slamming his hand on the table hard enough to make the water glasses tremble. "He's distracted, focused on protecting the girl instead of protecting his empire. If we attack now, fast and coordinated, we can divide the territory before he has a chance to react." Romero lit a cigarette, despite the closed room, and blew the smoke slowly before speaking. "And how exactly do we propose to attack? What's the plan?" Richard leaned forward, eyes shining with the excitement of someone who had thought through every detail. "First, the girl. If she dies, he completely falls apart, and then it's easy. Second, the port. We cut off his distributions, block the shipments, make his business bleed money. Third, the allies. We turn the people loyal to him against him, offering more territory, more power, more everything." Zhao finally spoke, his voice soft, but carrying the weight of decades of experience. "And Owen, his capo? He's been loyal since childhood. How do we deal with that loyalty?" A cruel smile crossed Richard's face. "We make him an offer he can't refuse. Position of boss. All of Jasper's territory. All he needs to do is betray his friend." The proposal reached Owen through a messenger 2 days later, a thin man in a cheap suit that couldn't hide the gun holster under his arm. They met at an Italian restaurant downtown, a place public enough to be safe, but private enough for conversations that couldn't be overheard. "Richard Cross has an offer for you," the messenger said, pushing a thick envelope across the table. Owen didn't even touch the envelope, keeping his hands visible and relaxed on the table, though every muscle in his body was tense. "What kind of offer?" "Partnership. You become boss. Take over all of Hale's territory. All you need to do is step aside when we attack. Let nature take its course." The fury that went through Owen was icy and controlled, years of training allowing him to keep his voice calm. "Tell Richard he can shove his offer where the sun don't shine. I'm loyal to Jasper. Always have been. Always will be." The messenger shrugged, as if the answer was expected, but he had to try anyway. "Loyalty doesn't pay the bills when the boss is dead, Owen. Think about it. Jasper's not going to die, and when he destroys all of you, I'll be standing next to him laughing." Owen stood up, throwing money on the table to cover the coffee he hadn't even touched. "Now get out of my sight before I forget that messengers are neutral." Owen went straight from the meeting to Jasper's office, entering without knocking because there were things that couldn't wait for etiquette. Jasper was alone, studying maps of the port that were spread across the desk, but looked up immediately when the door opened. "Boss, Cross offered partnership. For me to betray you." Owen didn't soften the words, just threw out the truth like he always did. "And?" Jasper's voice was calm, but there was a tension in his shoulders that showed he cared more than he let on. "And I told him to go to hell." Owen approached the desk, crossing his arms. "But Jasper, they're serious. They want your territory. They want you dead. They're planning a coordinated attack." "I know." Jasper looked back at the maps, but Owen knew he wasn't really seeing them. "Owen, I'm leaving the mob after I guarantee Ivy's safety." The shock made Owen take a step back. "You're really going to do it?" "Yes, and you take over." Jasper finally looked at his childhood friend, the brother he'd chosen. "You're my capo, my best friend, the only person I trust completely. You become boss. But what about you? Where will you go?" Owen's voice was hoarse with emotion he rarely showed. "Far away, with Ivy, normal life. No violence, No blood, no looking over my shoulder every day. There was peace in Jasper's voice as he said this, as if just thinking about the possibility brought relief. Jasper, bosses don't leave. You know that better than anyone. Owen tried to make his friend see reason, see the danger. I know, that's why I fake my death, disappear, and you take over. After my death. The plan came out simple, but they both knew the execution would be anything but. Owen felt tears burn in his eyes, and for the first time in years, he let them fall. This is insane. It's the only way. Jasper stood up, circling the desk to stand in front of his friend. Will you do this for me? Pretend you killed me? Take over and make peace with Cross? Owen looked at the man he'd followed through hell and back, who had saved his life more times than he could count, who was more of a brother than any blood tie could create. If that's what you want, yes, I'll do it. Jasper pulled him into a tight hug, the kind of hug that men in their world rarely allowed themselves. Thank you, brother. Chapter 5. Attack and Extreme Protection.
Move her, now.
1 week had passed since Jasper canceled the wedding, a week in which I tried to maintain some appearance of normalcy while living under constant surveillance. I went to the museum every day, worked on the fresco that was so close to being finished, came home, and tried not to think about the fact that my life had become something out of an action movie I'd never asked to watch. The guards had become part of the routine. Marcus and David, I'd finally learned their names, though I still didn't know much more beyond that. They were polite, professional, and kept a respectful distance that made it possible to forget about them for a few moments. Almost possible. It was a Thursday morning, the kind of ordinary day that suggested nothing but boredom and work, when everything exploded in such a literal way that I still have trouble believing it actually happened. I was on the ladder, working on a particularly delicate section of the fresco that required all my concentration, when I heard loud voices coming from the museum entrance. It wasn't unusual. Sometimes groups of students visited and made noise, so I didn't think much of it initially. I just kept working, the tiny brush moving with millimetric precision over the ancient pigment. And then I heard the first gunshot. The sound echoed off the museum walls with a clarity that made my blood freeze instantly. It wasn't the kind of sound you confuse with something else, not when you grow up watching movies and the news, not when that specific sound is etched into the collective unconscious as synonymous with absolute danger. I froze on the ladder, the brush falling from my hand and staining my lab coat with ultramarine blue, while my brain struggled to process what was happening. More shots followed, fast and constant, accompanied by screams and the sound of breaking glass. "Ivy, get down! Now!" It was Marcus's voice, coming from somewhere nearby, but that I couldn't locate through the panic that was starting to take over. I came down the ladder so fast I almost fell, my legs shaking so badly they could barely support me. David appeared out of nowhere, grabbing my arm hard enough to hurt, but I barely felt it, because fear had numbed everything except the basic survival instinct. "Behind the column! Stay down." He practically threw me behind one of the thick marble columns that supported the museum ceiling, and I huddled there, hugging my knees against my chest while trying to make myself as small as possible. The gunfire continued, and through the panic, I managed to process that there were at least 2 different guns firing. Jasper's guards were fighting whoever had invaded the museum, and the only reason to invade was to get me. This understanding hit me with a force that made my stomach churn. They were here for me. People were shooting, potentially dying, because of me. I don't know how long it lasted. It could have been minutes or hours. Time had lost all meaning while I was huddled behind the column, shaking and crying silently while praying for it to be over. Finally, silence fell over the museum like a heavy blanket. So absolute it was almost worse than the noise because it meant someone had won, and I didn't know who. "Ivy, are you okay?" Marcus's voice came from nearby, careful, and only when I heard it did I realized I'd been holding my breath. "I am," I managed to say, though my voice came out shaky and weak. "What happened?" "Cross's men tried to get you." David appeared next to Marcus, and that's when I noticed the blood on his shirt sleeve. Not much, just enough to show someone had hit him, even if just a graze. But we dealt with them. Dealt with. What a strange and sanitized word to describe what had just happened. Violence, gunshots, possibly death. "The boss is on his way," Marcus said, already grabbing his phone. "Stay here until he arrives." Jasper arrived 15 minutes later, and I heard him before I saw him. The footsteps were fast and heavy, echoing through the now empty museum because someone had had the good sense to evacuate the few visitors who were there. When he turned the corner and saw me, still huddled behind the column even though the danger had passed, the expression on his face was something between relief and absolute fury. "Ivy." He was in front of me in seconds, pulling me into his arms so hard I could barely breathe, but I didn't care because his warmth, His solidity was the only thing holding the pieces of me together. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" "No," I managed to say against his chest, the words muffled by the fabric of the shirt that was getting wet from my tears. "But Jasper, they shot. In the museum. There were other people here. They could have killed someone." I felt his body go tense, all his muscles contracting in a way that suggested imminent violence. "Cross will pay. In blood," and something in me broke at those words, all the adrenaline and fear transforming into something more desperate. I pulled away from him, my hands pushing against his solid chest even though it was useless. "No, no more violence. Please. They tried to kill you, Ivy." His voice rose, the green eyes almost black with fury. "They invaded a public museum, put civilians in danger, shot to get you, and you want me to do nothing? I want you to stop the cycle," I shouted back, because someone needed to say it. Someone needed to make him see. More violence only brings more violence. It doesn't solve anything. I saw the fury in him fight against something softer, something that looked like reluctant understanding. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, but no less intense. "I know, you're not from this world, and I don't want you to be." His hands came up to hold my face, forcing me to look at him. "That's why I'm going to take you out of it. But first, I guarantee they never touch you again. Never get close to you again." "How?" I whispered, exhausted from so much fear. "Moving you to the mansion. Extreme security until I solve this once and for all." The Hale mansion was everything I imagined, and nothing I expected at the same time. It was huge, obviously, with iron gates that opened to a circular driveway where a marble fountain spouted crystal clear water. The gardens were impeccable, so perfectly maintained they seemed artificial, and the house itself was a mix of classic and modern architecture that probably cost more money than I'd see in a lifetime. But beneath all the beauty and luxury, there was a current of constant tension that was impossible to ignore. Guards at every entrance, cameras in every corner, guns I could see even when people tried to hide them. It wasn't just a house, it was a fortress. Theo arrived an hour after me, brought by other guards, and the expression on his face oscillated between anger and worry. "Ivy, are you okay?" He hugged me so hard my ribs protested. When I heard about the attack, I thought, "I'm fine," I assured him, though I wasn't sure if it was true. The guards protected me. That's when Jasper entered the room where we were, and Theo turned to face him with an intensity that made the air heavy. "You guarantee my sister stays safe?" "With my life," Jasper responded without hesitation, and there was an absolute promise in those words. "And when you die?" Theo took a step closer, all the fear transforming into confrontation. "Because bosses die, Jasper. That's what happens in your world. What happens to her when you're not here anymore to protect her?" "I'm not going to die." The certainty in Jasper's voice was unshakable. "I'm going to disappear. With her. With you too, if you want. New identity, new life, far from all this." I saw shock cross my brother's face. "You're going to abandon everything? All the power, the territory, the entire organization? For her?" "Yes." Jasper looked at me as he answered, and there was so much love in that look it made my heart squeeze. Without hesitation. Theo studied Jasper for a long moment, and I could see the calculations happening behind his eyes, weighing risks and sincerity. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, I trust you." But then his finger lifted, pointing at Jasper's chest. "But if something happens to her, if she gets hurt because of this world of yours, I'll kill you myself. Understood?" A small smile touched Jasper's lips. "Fair." Later that night, after Theo was settled in one of the guest rooms, and the house finally got quiet, Jasper took me to the room that would be mine while I was there. It was huge, bigger than the living room of my apartment, with a king-size bed that seemed to swallow the space and enormous windows that looked out onto the illuminated gardens. "How long am I trapped here?" I asked, looking out the window at the beauty that seemed more like a golden cage. "Until I resolve the war. A few more weeks at most." Jasper was behind me, close enough for me to feel his warmth but not touching. "And after? After we disappear. Me, you, Theo. Owen takes over as boss, makes peace with Cross through territorial deals, and we live far away. Normal. The word normal came out with so much longing it hurt to hear. I turned to face him. "Where?" "Wherever you want." His hands found mine, intertwining our fingers. "Country, beach, mountains. You choose and I make it happen." The tears came back, but this time they weren't from fear. "I want the country. Small house with a garden. A studio where I can restore art without deadlines or pressure. Just peace. Then that's what you'll have." He pulled my hands to his lips, kissing my knuckles one by one. "I promise." "And you," I whispered. "What do you want?" The green eyes met mine, and there was a vulnerability in them I rarely saw. "You. Waking up with you every day, sleeping with you every night. Life without looking over my shoulder, without waiting for betrayal, without blood on my hands. That's all I want. You're everything. I leaned forward and kissed him, soft and slow, trying to put into a kiss all the words I couldn't say. When we pulled apart, I rested my forehead against his. Then let's make it happen, together. And there, in the fortified mansion in the middle of a war that was just beginning, we clung to the hope of a future that seemed impossible, but that we were determined to reach anyway. Chapter 6. Escape Plan and Susie Sabotages.
We leave tonight.
Tonight? Are we ready?
Living in the Hale mansion was like existing in a glass bubble, beautiful on the outside but fragile in a way I could feel constantly. 3 days had passed since the attack at the museum, 3 days in which I'd barely left the room except to eat and see Theo, 3 days in which the weight of everything was starting to suffocate me in a way that not even the opulent beauty around me could disguise. Jasper spent most of his time in his office with Owen, planning something he refused to tell me details about because he said it was safer if I didn't know until everything was ready. I hated being left out, hated the feeling of helplessness, but I also understood that there were things in his world that were better left in the shadows. It was on the 4th night, when I was lying in the enormous bed trying to convince my brain to shut off enough to sleep, that I heard the soft knock on the door. I sat up in bed, pulling the blanket up to my chest even though I was fully dressed. "Come in," I called, and I wasn't surprised when it was Jasper who opened the door, entering with that dominant presence that made the room seem smaller. "Can't sleep?" he asked, closing the door behind him and approaching the bed with slow steps. "How could I?" I responded with brutal honesty. "I'm living in a fortress, hidden like I'm some valuable treasure, while people are planning to kill me out there. Sleep isn't exactly easy." He sat on the edge of the bed, close enough for me to feel his warmth. "I know, and I'm sorry for putting you in this position." His hands found mine over the blanket. "But it's almost over." "What?" I leaned forward, my heart racing. "You have a plan?" "I do. Owen and I have spent the last few days finalizing every detail." There was a determination in his green eyes that I'd learned to recognize. "In 10 days, I'm going to fake my death. Explosion. Unrecognizable body that will be a substitute. Owen takes over as boss after my death, makes peace with Cross by offering territory as compensation. And the 3 of us, me, you, and Theo, disappear with new identities." I processed the words slowly, feeling the weight of each one. "You're really going to do this? Abandon everything." "I'm not abandoning anything that matters," he corrected, squeezing my hands. "I'm choosing the only thing that really matters. You." What we didn't know, what we couldn't know while we held each other in that luxurious room, was that someone was listening to every word said inside that mansion. A housekeeper who had worked for the Hales for years, a quiet and efficient woman no one noticed enough to suspect, had been bought by Richard Cross with enough money to change her life. And that same night, while I finally managed to sleep in Jasper's arms, believing that in 10 days we'd be safe, the housekeeper was at a payphone on the other side of town, reporting every detail of the plan to Susie Cross. "He's going to fake his death," the woman said, her voice low and urgent. "Explosion in 10 days. Has a substitute. Owen takes over and makes peace. Jasper disappears with the girl." On the other end of the line, Susie held the phone so hard her fingers turned white. The humiliation of having been left, of having been replaced by an ordinary art restorer, burned like acid. "Are you sure?" "Positive. I heard them planning everything in the office. My father will want to know about this." Susie was already moving, grabbing her car keys with her other hand. "You'll get the rest of the payment tomorrow." Half an hour later, Susie was sitting in her father's office, words pouring out in a furious stream, while Richard listened with that calculating expression that revealed nothing of his thoughts. "He's going to fake his death to run away with her?" Susie practically shouted when she finished telling everything. "This is unacceptable." Richard leaned back in the leather chair, fingers drumming on the armrest as he processed the information. "Perfect," he finally said, and there was satisfaction in his voice. "Perfect? How is this perfect?" "Because now we know exactly what he's going to do and when." A cruel smile crossed Richard's face. "If he's planning a fake attack in 10 days, we attack in 7, by surprise. We kill Jasper for real, and the girl along with him. Owen takes over by default. No choice, and we have our peace." Susie processed the words, and slowly a smile began to form on her lips too. "When? I'll coordinate with the other families. Battaglia, Romero, Zhao, they all have an interest in seeing Jasper fall." Richard picked up the phone on the desk. 7 days, and then we end this once and for all." 2 days passed in a false peace that I didn't know was false. Jasper seemed more relaxed, almost happy in a way I'd never seen, and that made my heart squeeze because I was finally seeing the man he would be without the weight of the empire on his shoulders. It was during the afternoon of the 2nd day that everything fell apart. I was in the garden with Theo, enjoying the few moments of sun we could get between meetings and planning, when I saw Owen practically running toward the mansion. There was urgency in his every movement, and I instinctively knew something was wrong. "Ivy, get inside," Now, Jasper appeared at the back door, and the tone of absolute command in his voice left no room for arguments. Theo and I ran inside, and as soon as the door closed, Jasper turned to Owen with an expression that would make grown men back down. Talk. We have a traitor, housekeeper. She heard everything and told Susie. Owen was breathless, as if he'd run the entire distance. Cross knows the plan, knows about the 10 days, and now he's going to attack earlier. Real attack instead of letting you fake it. I felt the blood freeze in my veins. When? My contacts say in 5 days, maybe less. Owen looked at Jasper. Boss, they're coming with everything. All the families. It won't be a small or silent attack. It's going to be total war. I saw the change happen in Jasper. The relaxed and happy man disappeared, replaced by the boss the world feared. Then we changed the plan. We leave now. Now? I almost shouted. But you said everything wasn't ready. It's not, but if we stay, you die. And I won't risk that. He was already moving, giving orders to Owen. Tunnel under the mansion. Comes out in an abandoned warehouse 3 blocks from here. Is there a car waiting? I'll arrange it in an hour. Owen was already on the phone. Ivy, Theo, take only the essentials. 1 backpack each. Documents, cash, enough clothes for a few days. Jasper turned to me, hands holding my shoulders. We leave in 2 hours. Understood? I wanted to argue, wanted to say we needed more time, but the urgency in his eyes silenced me. I just nodded, already pulling Theo toward the rooms. 2 hours later, we were in the mansion's basement, in a place I didn't even know existed. There was a metal door hidden behind wine shelves, and when Jasper opened it, it revealed a dark tunnel that stretched into the darkness. This tunnel was built by my father, Jasper explained as he grabbed flashlights from a hidden box. For emergencies exactly like this. Owen was there for the final goodbye, and that's when I saw tears in the eyes of the big, dangerous man that I knew this was real. This was really happening. Goodbyes are always emotional, and in this story it seems they're even more emotional. Chapter 7. Escape and Final Confrontation.
It's over.
The tunnel was dark, in a way that seemed to swallow the light from the flashlights we carried, and the smell of damp earth and mold filled my lungs with each breath. My footsteps echoed against the concrete walls that stretched infinitely ahead, and I focused on putting one foot in front of the other, because thinking too much about the fact that we were literally fleeing underground would let panic take over. Theo was right behind me, carrying the 2 backpacks that contained everything left of our old lives, and I could hear his heavy breathing mixed with the sound of our footsteps. Jasper led the way, one hand holding the flashlight, and the other resting on the gun strapped to his waist. Always vigilant even down here, where theoretically we were safe. How much further? I asked, my voice echoing strangely in the enclosed space. Few minutes. The tunnel exits in an abandoned warehouse 3 blocks from here. Jasper looked back, green eyes glowing in the dim light. Are you okay? Scared but trusting, I admitted, because there was no point in lying now. Because you're here. I saw something soften in his face. Something that contrasted completely with the tension in his shoulders. I always will be, I promise. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, but was probably only 15 minutes, we reached a metal ladder that climbed up into the darkness. Jasper went up first, pushing open a heavy trapdoor that opened with a creak of rusted metal. He disappeared for a moment, and then his head reappeared. Clear. Let's go. I climbed the ladder with legs trembling from adrenaline and fear, emerging in a warehouse that smelled of dust and abandonment. Moonlight came through broken windows in the ceiling, creating ghostly patterns on the cracked concrete floor, and there, parked near a side door, was a discreet black car that looked completely out of place in this scene of decay. And next to the car stood Owen. Boss. He stepped away from the vehicle, extending a thick envelope to Jasper. Everything's ready. Documents, enough money to start over, address of a house in the country in Montana that's already in your fake names. No one will find it. Jasper took the envelope, but instead of opening it, he pulled Owen into a quick but intense hug. Thank you for everything. You're the brother I chose, and you're the only boss I truly respected. Owen pulled away, quickly wiping something that could be tears before turning to me. Take care of him. He seems tough, but he's soft for you. I laughed through my own tears that threatened to fall. I will. I promise. Owen nodded, satisfied, and then looked at Theo. Take care of both of them. You got it, my brother responded, shaking Owen's hand firmly. That's when we heard it. The sound of several cars arriving too fast, braking abruptly outside the warehouse. Tires screeching on asphalt. Doors slamming. Heavy footsteps approaching. Shit. Jasper was already pushing me and Theo toward the car. Owen, you said it was clear. It was. I swear it was. Owen already had his gun in hand, positioning himself between us and the warehouse's main door. But it was too late. The doors exploded open, and what looked like 20 armed men invaded the space, spreading out quickly to block all possible exits. And in front of them, walking with an arrogance that made my blood boil, were Richard Cross and Susie. Jasper Hale, Richard's voice echoed through the empty warehouse. loaded with triumph and anger. You really thought you'd run from me? Jasper pushed me behind him, putting his own body as a barrier between me and the armed men. Richard, get out of the way. Let us go. Let you go. Richard laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. You broke a sacred alliance, caused a war, humiliated my daughter, and now you want to run like a coward? I want to live, away from this life, with her. Jasper's voice was calm, but I could feel the tension in every muscle of his body. Let me go, Richard. You take over the territory. You win. Everybody wins. Everyone except me. Susie took a step forward, and even in the dim light I could see fury distorting her beautiful face. You humiliated me, canceled our wedding for her. Her finger pointed at me with so much hatred it made me instinctively back away. But something in me, maybe the exhaustion from days of living in fear, or maybe just the anger at being treated like an object instead of a person, made me take a step forward despite Jasper's arm trying to hold me back. He never loved you, Susie. My voice came out firmer than I expected. You knew that from the beginning. It was a business arrangement, nothing more. But he was mine, by contract, by family alliance. She practically spat the words. People aren't property, I shouted back, all the frustration and fear transforming into anger. He wasn't yours. Nobody belongs to anyone. Susie's face turned red with fury, but before she could respond, Richard pulled out a gun, pointing it directly at Jasper's chest. Last chance, Hale. You come back, marry my daughter, maintain the alliance, or all of you die right here. Richard's hand was steady, not trembling. Jasper didn't move, didn't back down, didn't show even a hint of fear. When he spoke, it was with that icy voice I'd only heard once before, the voice of the boss the whole world feared. Richard, you're making a fatal mistake. I have 20 armed men here. What do you have? 1 capo and 2 civilians, Richard mocked. And then Jasper smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made my blood run cold, even knowing he was on my side. I have Owen. That's when I heard it. The sound of more cars arriving, doors slamming, coordinated footsteps, and then men began appearing from the warehouse shadows, men who must have entered silently while we were all distracted by the confrontation, positioning themselves behind Cross's men. Owen was in front of them, and there was cold satisfaction on his face. Boss always has plan B. What happened next was absolute chaos. Someone shot first, I never knew who, and then the warehouse exploded in violence. Jasper threw me to the ground, covering my body with his, while bullets flew over our heads. I could hear Theo screaming my name, could hear Owen giving orders, could hear the horrible sound of bullets hitting flesh. Stay down, Jasper shouted in my ear, and then he was moving, getting up, shooting with a precision that showed years of practice. I don't know how long it lasted. Seconds? Minutes? Time lost meaning in the middle of the noise and fear and smell of burnt gunpowder. But eventually the shots started to decrease, Cross's men falling or surrendering one by one. That's when I saw it. Richard, on the ground but still conscious, raising his trembling gun, not at Jasper, at me. If I can't have the alliance, nobody has anything, he screamed, his finger squeezing the trigger. No! Jasper threw himself in front of me at the last second. The sound of the shot was deafening. I saw Jasper's body contort with the impact, saw blood start to stain his shirt. I screamed, a primitive sound of pure terror as he fell, but Jasper didn't fall completely. Even in pain, even bleeding, he raised his own gun and fired. The bullet hit Richard's leg, making the older man scream and fall. Owen was on top of them in seconds, subduing Susie, who was trying to flee and pointing his gun at Richard's head. War's over. Now, I was next to Jasper, my hands shaking as I pressed against the wound in his shoulder, trying to stop the blood that seemed endless. Jasper, you're bleeding too much. I'm fine, he said through clenched teeth, the pain evident in his voice. It's just the shoulder. He looked at Owen. Finish this. Owen turned to Richard, who was on the ground, holding his bleeding leg. War's over. Jasper disappeared. I take over as new boss. You accept peace, or I finish what the boss started. Richard looked around, seeing his men dead or captured, seeing that he'd lost completely. I accept. Peace. Great. Owen crouched down to Richard's eye level. And Jasper, officially, died in this shootout. Understood. Understood, Richard whispered. Defeated. Owen helped us up, supporting Jasper on his uninjured side while I held his other arm. Theo appeared, grabbing the backpacks we'd abandoned. Go, boss. Before someone changes their mind. Owen guided us to the car. Thank you. For everything, Jasper said, despite the obvious pain. Just be happy. That's what you deserve. Owen looked at me, both of you. I hugged him quickly, tears wetting my face. Thank you for saving him. Always, Owen promised, and then looked at Theo. Take care of both of them. You got it, my brother responded. We got in the car, me in the backseat with Jasper while Theo drove. As we started to pull away, I looked through the rear window and saw Owen standing there, watching us go, one hand raised in silent farewell. Good luck, brother, I heard him whisper, though it was impossible through the glass and distance. And then we turned the corner, and he disappeared from view. What is power and the adrenaline of running an empire compared to real love, right? I think our protagonists understood that very well. Chapter 8: New Life and Adjustment.
We're safe here.
5 months had passed since that night in the warehouse. 5 months since we fled the city and everything we knew, and sometimes it was still hard to believe this was real. That I was actually here, in Montana, living in a small house in the middle of the countryside, with blue mountains stretching across the horizon, and a silence so deep that sometimes it scared someone used to the constant noise of the city. The house was nothing compared to the mansion we left behind, but it was perfect in a way that luxury could never be. It was a 2-story wooden structure with a wide porch that wrapped around the entire front, large windows that let the morning sun invade the rooms, and a garden I was slowly transforming into something beautiful. There was room for everything that mattered, for nothing that didn't, and a sense of peace that permeated every corner. I was in the garden that Saturday afternoon, kneeling in the damp earth while planting roses I'd bought at the local nursery, when I heard the sound of wood being hammered from the back of the property. I looked over my shoulder and saw Jasper working on fixing the fence that surrounded our little piece of paradise, wearing faded jeans and a gray t-shirt that showed muscles he'd developed through years of training for a completely different world than this. It was still strange to see him like this, so casual and relaxed. So different from the man in the impeccable suit who had sat next to me on the subway almost a year ago, but it was a good kind of strange, the type that made my heart squeeze with love every time I stopped to really look at what we'd built. From the other side of the house, I heard music playing softly, probably coming from the garage Theo had transformed into a makeshift office. My brother was working on a freelance project for a California tech company, doing all the work remotely while enjoying country life that he swore he hated, but that I could see in his eyes he was starting to love. The three of us had adjusted to the new life in different ways, each dealing with the drastic change at our own pace. But somehow it was working. It was really working. But not everything was easy. Jasper especially struggled with things that seemed simple and natural to me and Theo. Learning to live without guards, without constant paranoia, without expecting every shadow to hide an enemy, was a slow and painful process that I saw happening in small moments throughout the days. That night, after dinner, that we cooked together in the small but functional kitchen, I found him in the living room checking the windows for the 3rd time in an hour. He touched each latch, tested each lock, looked through the curtains at the dark garden outside with a tension in his shoulders that shouldn't be there. Jasper, my voice made him turn, and I saw the moment he realized what he was doing, how he was letting old habits dictate new actions. You don't need to check the windows every hour. We're safe here. Habit. He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration with himself. Sorry, I know it's excessive. I approached him, placing my hands on his chest and feeling his heart beating too fast under my palms. We're safe. Owen guaranteed it. Nobody knows where we are. Nobody's looking because you're officially dead. You can relax. I know. He covered my hands with his, intertwining our fingers. But it's 30 years of instincts saying to always be alert. Always expect the attack. It takes time to completely turn that off. I know. I stood on my tiptoes and kissed him softly, feeling the tension begin to leave his muscles. And I'm here, always, for however long it takes. I saw something soften in his green eyes, that vulnerability he only showed me. I don't know what I did to deserve you. You left an entire empire behind, I reminded him with a small smile. I think that counts. He laughed quietly, pulling me into a hug that completely enveloped me in his warmth and strength. Best decision I ever made. 2 weeks later, on a sunny Wednesday morning, we got married. It wasn't anything like the wedding Jasper would have had with Susie. No elaborate party or hundreds of guests or ostentatious luxury. It was just the three of us. The local justice of the peace, who was a 70-year-old gentleman named Harold, and his wife, who served as second witness because the law required it. The courthouse was small and smelled faintly of mold, with furniture that was probably 50 years old and a green carpet that had seen better days. But when I stood in front of Jasper, holding his hands as we prepared to make vows that would officially change our lives, none of that mattered. Jasper had written his own vows, and when he started reading from the crumpled paper he pulled from his pocket, I saw his hands trembling slightly. Ivy, you saved me from a life that was killing me from the inside, slowly but inevitably. You gave me peace when I didn't know peace was possible. You gave me a reason to live beyond just surviving. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone, and I'll spend every day of the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the love you give me. The tears were already falling when it was my turn, and I didn't even try to hold them back because there was no shame in crying from happiness. Jasper, you risked everything for me, left an empire, power, everything you knew, and chose love. chose me, chose us. I love you more than words can express, and I promise to spend every day showing you that you made the right choice. When Justice Harold declared us husband and wife, when Jasper kissed me with a tenderness that contrasted completely with the reputation he'd left behind, I heard Theo sniffling behind us, and knew without looking that my brother was crying too. "Welcome to the family. Officially," Theo said afterward, hugging Jasper in a way that showed any reservations he'd had about the relationship had completely disappeared. "Take care of my sister, with my life," Jasper promised, and we both knew it wasn't a figure of speech. Life after the wedding continued with its beautiful simplicity. Jasper got a job at a local carpentry shop owned by a man named Tom, who was 72, and looking for someone to eventually take over the business when he retired. At first, I was surprised Jasper knew how to work with wood, but he explained he'd learned from his grandfather as a child, before his world became about violence and power. Seeing him come home every afternoon with clothes covered in sawdust and hands stained with varnish, talking animatedly about a table he was building or a chair he'd repaired, was a quiet joy I kept in my heart. This was the man he should have been all along, before fate and circumstances transformed him into something darker. I'd started doing restoration work from home, small projects for the local museum that was tiny compared to Hartley, but had some interesting pieces that needed attention. I'd also started offering art history classes at the town library once a week, and was surprised by how many people showed up, hungry for knowledge in a small town where cultural entertainment was scarce. Theo continued his remote work, but had also started photographing Montana's landscapes, discovering an artistic talent he didn't know he had. He talked about maybe doing an exhibition eventually, and I saw in his eyes a happiness I hadn't seen since before our parents died. We were happy, simply genuinely happy in a way none of us had planned, but all of us deserved. The surprise came 3 months after the wedding, when I heard a knock on the door and opened it to find Mira, my best friend from the old city, standing on the porch with a suitcase and a huge smile. "Ivy!" She pulled me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe. "I missed you so much." "Mira!" I was in complete shock. "How did you find me?" "Theo gave me the address," she admitted, still hugging me. "He said you guys were settled enough for visitors now." When we finally separated and I brought her inside, Jasper appeared from the kitchen, probably alerted by the noise. Mira stopped in the middle of the room, eyes wide as she looked at my husband. "Ivy, you didn't tell me he was this hot in person," she whispered, but not as quietly as she thought, because I saw the corner of Jasper's mouth lift in an almost smile. "Mira," I lightly slapped her arm, feeling my face heat up. Jasper approached, extending his hand politely. "Pleasure. I've heard a lot about you. I'm Jasper. The pleasure's all mine," Mira said, shaking his hand while shooting me a look that clearly said, "We need to talk later. Thank you for taking care of my best friend." "It's the easiest job I've ever had," he responded, and there was so much love in his voice that I saw Mira melt a little. That night, after Mira went to sleep in the guest room and Theo retreated to his garage, Jasper and I sat on the back deck, looking at the stars that shone more brightly here than they ever had in the city. The air was cold enough to need blankets, and I was nestled against his side, my head resting on the shoulder that had been my accidental pillow so many months ago. "Do you miss it?" I asked softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "The power? The control? Being the boss?" "No." The answer came quick and certain. "I feel relief. For the first time in 30 years, I sleep without fear of waking up dead, without planning 3 steps ahead of potential betrayals, without blood on my hands. And you're happy, here, with me?" I needed to hear it, even knowing the answer. He pulled me closer, kissing the top of my head. "Happier than I imagined was possible. You gave me a life worth living, Ivy. Not just surviving, but really living." He paused. "And you? Do you regret it? Falling in love with me despite all the danger and craziness?" "Never," I responded with absolute conviction. "Even with all the fear, all the violence, all the insanity, it was worth every second, because it brought me here, brought you, brought us. I love you, Ivy Hale." His last name was mine now too, and every time I heard it, it sounded like music. "I love you, Jasper Hale." I smiled against his chest. "My favorite ex-mob boss." I felt the laugh vibrate through him. "I'm your only ex-mob boss." "Exactly. That's why you're my favorite." He pulled me into a kiss under the stars. And there, in the middle of nowhere in Montana, with mountains all around and peace finally achieved, I knew we'd won. Against all odds, against all reasons to fail, we had won. And this simple and beautiful life was worth more than any empire. Chapter 9. Final Threat and Permanent Peace.
You need to understand.
A year and a half had passed since the night of the escape. 18 months of peace built on foundations of difficult choices and love that had proven to be stronger than any empire. And now, with my 8-month pregnant belly making every movement an exercise in careful coordination, I was in the garden trying to plant more flowers, while Jasper watched me from the porch, with that expression between amused and worried that had become constant in recent weeks. Ivy, you're 8 months pregnant. Let me plant the flowers. His voice came loaded with a gentle concern that contrasted completely with the dangerous man he'd been. I'm not an invalid, I protested, though I was clearly struggling to bend down without losing my balance. They're just flowers. He was already coming down the porch steps, heading toward me with determined strides. You're carrying our son. That gives you a free pass to rest while I do the heavy lifting. Heavy lifting? I laughed, accepting his hand to help me up. They're petunias, Jasper, not giant rocks. Still, he gently guided me to the rocking chair on the porch, the one we'd bought specifically so I could sit and watch the garden grow. You rest, I plant. Deal? I was going to argue more. Really was, but the truth was my back was hurting and sitting seemed like a wonderful idea. Deal, but you're spoiling me too much. Impossible. He kissed my forehead before returning to the garden, picking up the shovel, and starting to work on the flowers with a delicacy surprising for hands that had held weapons for so long. Watching him there, in jeans and an old t-shirt, completely focused on planting flowers to make me happy, made my heart overflow with a love so big it sometimes scared me. This man had literally left everything behind for me, and now was building a family with me in a place where nobody knew who he'd been, where he could just be Jasper, husband, and future father. It was that afternoon, when the sun was starting to descend on the horizon, painting the sky orange and pink, that we heard the sound of a car coming up the dirt road that led to our house. Jasper tensed immediately, those old instincts returning in a flash, and I saw his hand automatically move to where a gun used to be before he forced himself to relax. Probably Tom bringing that wood I ordered, he said, more to himself than to me, but we both knew he was lying to calm his own nerves. But when the car stopped in front of the house and the door opened, it wasn't Tom who got out, it was Owen. I saw shock cross Jasper's face, followed by pure joy I rarely saw in him. He was running before he even thought, jumping off the porch in 2 leaps and pulling his childhood friend into a hug so tight I feared one of them wouldn't be able to breathe. Owen! Jasper's voice was hoarse with emotion. What are you doing here? I thought we agreed on no contact. I know. Owen pulled back, wiping something that could be tears from his own eyes. But I missed you too much, brother. And there was something I needed to tell you in person. That's when Owen looked at the porch and saw me, with my huge belly impossible to hide. His eyes widened comically. Boss, you're going to be a father? Jasper came back to the porch, helping me up carefully before bringing me close to him, his hand resting protectively over my belly. Yes, 8 months. It's a boy, Owen repeated, and there was so much amazement and happiness in his voice it made tears sting my eyes. Congratulations, to both of you. Owen, I said softly, pulling his attention. We're going to name him Owen, after you. Absolute silence. Owen stood completely still, mouth open, processing the words as if he couldn't believe what he'd heard. When he finally managed to speak, his voice came out broken. You're going to name him after me? You saved our lives, Jasper said, and there was so much weight in those words. You made it possible for us to have this life, this family. It's the least we can do. Owen's tears fell freely now, without shame or attempt to hide them. I don't know what to say. Thank you so much. We sat on the deck, the 3 of us, with iced tea and cookies I'd made earlier, and Owen updated us on everything we'd left behind. Peace had settled, he said, more stable than anyone expected. Cross had accepted the terms, the other families had calmed down, and the territory was divided in a way everyone considered fair. And nobody's looking for me? Jasper asked, tension still present in his shoulders despite the relaxed atmosphere. No, you're officially dead. Owen took a sip of tea. The story going around is that you died in the warehouse shootout, that I took over reluctantly but competently, and that peace was restored. Some people suspect it might have been different, but without evidence, they're just rumors. And Susie? I couldn't help asking. Married Batalia's son 6 months later. New alliance. New power. Owen shrugged. She got what she wanted in the end, just not with Jasper. We talked until the sun set completely, and the stars started to appear, talking about everything and nothing, reconnecting friendships that distance and time had forced to lie dormant but never dead. But eventually, Owen got serious, and I knew we'd reached the real reason for the visit. Boss, there's something you need to know. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Battaglia is suspicious. He has an investigator who thinks you might be alive. No proof, just suspicions, but he's looking. The air grew heavy. Jasper tensed beside me, and I instinctively placed my hand over his. Is he sure? No, but he's looking. Owen looked between the 2 of us. I came to warn you personally because if he finds anything concrete, it could be a problem. What are you going to do? I asked, fear starting to squeeze my chest. I'll handle it, Owen said with a determination that reminded me why Jasper trusted him completely. I'll talk to Battaglia, explain that even if Jasper were alive, he left everything behind. He's not a threat to anyone. I'll offer more territory if necessary to buy his silence. And if he doesn't accept, Jasper was in boss mode now, calculating possibilities and risks. Then I'll do what you would do, protect you. Owen responded simply. You're my brother, boss. And I won't let anything happen to you or your family. Owen left the next day, after a breakfast where Theo finally appeared and hugged the man who had helped save our lives. We watched the car disappear down the dirt road, and Jasper pulled me close, his hand resting on the belly where our son was growing. Do you think it'll be okay? I whispered against his chest. Owen has never let me down. He won't start now. There was absolute confidence in his voice, and Jasper was right. A week later, we received a short message through an encrypted email that only we knew how to access. Resolved. Batalia's not looking anymore. Peace guaranteed, but no contact for the next few years. Total security. Owen. Jasper read the message 3 times before deleting it, and I saw relief wash over him like a wave. It's over. For real this time. It's over, I repeated, and finally, I completely believed it. 3 years later, the sound of children's laughter filled the garden as I watched from the porch, with one hand resting on the belly that was growing again, this time with our daughter, who would be born in 4 months. Owen, our 3-year-old son with green eyes just like his father's, and dark hair just like mine, was running through the garden chasing a blue butterfly dancing in the afternoon air. Daddy, look, butterfly. His high-pitched voice was full of wonder. Jasper was running after little Owen, laughing in a free and genuine way I never tired of hearing. Careful, don't step on Mommy's flowers. Theo was sitting next to me, a proud smile on his face as he watched his nephew play. Who would have thought, huh? Ex-art restorer who slept on the wrong shoulder and got a whole life. Right shoulder, I corrected with a smile. The best mistake of my life. And look at the ex-mob boss becoming a family man in the country. Theo shook his head, still impressed. If someone had told me this story 4 years ago, I would have said they were crazy. Sometimes I still think I'm dreaming, I admitted, watching Jasper pick up little Owen, both laughing as the butterfly escaped. That all this is too good to be real. But it is real. You deserved it. You both deserved it. Theo squeezed my hand. After everything you went through, this peace is more than deserved. That night, after little Owen was put to bed with a story about gentle dragons and brave princesses, Jasper and I sat on the deck like we did almost every night. He pulled me onto his lap carefully, accommodating the growing belly between us, and we stayed there in comfortable silence looking at the stars. Do you regret it? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Leaving everything behind? Never. Not for a single second. He kissed my hair. That day on the subway, when you slept on my shoulder, that was the day my life truly began. Everything before that was just empty existence, and mine changed completely, for the better. I leaned my head on his shoulder, on that same shoulder where it all began. We won, Jasper, against everything and everyone, and now we have peace. We have love. We have family. Everything I always wanted but never thought I could have. His hands rested on my belly, feeling our daughter move. And now I have more than I dreamed was possible. Forever, I promised, turning to kiss him softly. Forever, he agreed against my lips. And there, under the Montana stars, with our son sleeping inside the house and our daughter growing inside me, with Theo laughing at something on his computer in the garage, I knew we had achieved the impossible. She slept on the wrong shoulder, or maybe on the absolutely right shoulder, depending on how you looked at it. He was the boss, feared and powerful, capable of controlling empires with a look. She was ordinary, gentle, innocent, living a simple life restoring ancient art. But together they were peace, and he traded the entire empire for her, because some loves are worth more than any territory, more than any power. And some wars are worth fighting, even if it's to walk away from them completely. Jasper and Ivy Hale, ex-boss and art restorer, living in peace, raising a family, building a future nobody believed was possible. Now I've put together some really interesting trivia for you. So if you like fun facts and Easter eggs, you're going to love what I'm about to tell you. The story has 4 main villains: Caleb, the abusive ex; Bianca, the jealous ex-mistress; Nathan, the vengeful brother; and Victor, the big rival. So you could see how much our lovebirds suffered before they could be together. This next fun fact I doubt you noticed. Mira never knew Adrian's full last name until she became Mira Wolf. Leah was the only character who threatened to kill Adrian and lived to tell the tale. The first time Adrian says "I love you" is in public, not in private. Adrian never takes anyone's life directly in this story, but I can't reveal anything about the other ones. The baby's gender is revealed in Chapter 9, but the baby girl's name is never revealed in the story. Who knows? Maybe you'll find out in the future. Mira runs away in fear of the dangerous world, but becomes the queen of that world. The story has one complete flashback, and you realize how this was a love as intense as it was sudden. Mira's answer, Caleb who, at the end, mirrors how she completely overcame the trauma and is ready for a new life without adventures. But will she be able to achieve that? And to watch another unmissable story, click on the video that appears now on your screen and check it out.